The morning alarm rang across Kepler Station like it did every day for the past 3 years. Jake Martinez opened his eyes and looked at the metal ceiling above his bunk bed. The cold air made him shiver as he got up and put on his military uniform. Around him, other human cadets were doing the same thing. They moved quietly and carefully, not wanting to wake up the alien cadets who slept in nearby rooms. Jake walked to the bathroom and washed his face with cold water. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw the same tired eyes that had been staring back at him for months. The Galactic Military Academy was supposed to be the best place to train future soldiers. But for humans, it felt more like a prison with rules. Lisa Brooks was already in the dining hall when Jake arrived. She sat at their usual table in the corner, eating something that looked like gray paste but tasted like nothing. The alien cadets got better food, but humans had to eat special meals that were supposed to keep them calm. Lisa looked up when Jake sat down with his own tray of gray food. "Did you hear what they were saying yesterday?" Lisa asked in a quiet voice. "The Zephyrian cadets were laughing about us again. They think we are weak because of all the rules we have to follow." Jake nodded and took a bite of his food. The taste was bland and boring, just like everything else in their daily routine. "Let them laugh," he said. "We know why we have these rules, even if they do not understand." At another table across the room, Vexstar was talking loudly to his friends. His purple skin was bright with excitement as he told jokes about the human cadets. "Look at them eating their baby food," he said with a laugh that sounded like air being squeezed from a balloon. "I heard they have to take special medicine just to sleep at night without having bad dreams." Throck, a massive Braxton with gray skin like stone, slammed his huge fist on the table. The sound made everyone in the dining hall look their way. "Human soldiers," he said in his deep voice that rumbled like thunder. "What a joke that is. They are so weak that they need machines to help them think straight during training." The other alien cadets laughed and agreed. They had all heard the stories about human restrictions. Humans could not use their full strength during fighting practice. They had to wear special devices on their heads that controlled their brain activity. They were not allowed to do the hardest training exercises that other species did without any problem. Ryan Cooper, Amy Stone, and Kevin Ross joined Jake and Lisa at their table. They had all heard the comments from the alien cadets, but none of them looked angry or upset. This was normal for them. They had learned to ignore the mockery and focus on their own training. "The final combat test is tomorrow," Ryan said as he sat down. His voice was calm and steady, even though Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. "Admiral Keffer made the announcement this morning." Amy nodded and pushed her gray food around on her plate. "The Crucible," she said. "I heard it is the hardest test the Academy has ever created. Even some of the strongest alien cadets have failed it in the past." Kevin looked around the dining hall at all the different species of cadets. There were Zephyrians with their purple skin and long arms. There were Braxtons who looked like walking mountains made of muscle and bone. There were Vorticons whose crystal bodies sparkled in the light like living diamonds. All of them looked confident and ready for the challenge ahead. "We will do our best," Kevin said simply. "That is all we can do." After breakfast, the human cadets went to their morning classes. They learned about alien cultures, space navigation, and military strategy. The teachers were mostly aliens who treated the human students differently than the others. They spoke more slowly to humans and gave them easier questions to answer. It was like they thought humans were children who needed extra help to understand simple things. During lunch, Jake overheard a conversation between two Vorticon cadets. Their crystal bodies made tiny musical sounds when they moved, and their voices sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The human restriction protocols are fascinating from a scientific perspective," one of them said. "Their neural dampeners prevent emotional overload, while their mood stabilizers maintain psychological equilibrium during high-stress scenarios." "Indeed," replied the other. "It is remarkable that such a primitive species requires so much technological assistance to function in a military environment. One wonders how they ever survived long enough to develop space travel." Jake pretended not to hear them, but their words stung anyway. He knew that humans were seen as the weakest species in the Galactic Alliance. Every other race had evolved special abilities that made them superior fighters. Zephyrians were incredibly fast and could jump amazing distances. Braxtons were strong enough to crush metal with their bare hands. Vorticons could think faster than computers and never made mistakes in their calculations. Humans seemed ordinary. By comparison, they were not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. They needed help from machines just to compete with the other species. At least that is what everyone believed. The afternoon training session was held in the Academy's main gymnasium. It was a huge room with white walls and bright lights everywhere. The alien cadets practiced their combat skills with enthusiasm and confidence. Vexstar moved like lightning, dodging laser blasts and jumping over obstacles with ease. Throck lifted weights that would crush most other beings. The Vorticon cadets worked together in perfect coordination, their movements precise and calculated. The human cadets trained in a separate area with their own instructors. They wore their neural dampeners, small devices that looked like metal headbands. The mood stabilizers were injected into their arms every morning and made them feel calm and relaxed all day long. Their training was slower and more careful than what the other species did. Colonel Patricia Hughes watched the human cadets from the observation deck above the gymnasium. She was the only human officer at the academy, and she had been there longer than anyone could remember. Her face was serious as she observed the training session below. "They are ready," she said to herself, but nobody else heard her words. As the day ended, Jake and his fellow human cadets returned to their quarters. The alien cadets were still talking and laughing in the hallways, making jokes about tomorrow's test and how easy it would be for them. They seemed to think that the humans would fail quickly and embarrass themselves in front of everyone. Jake lay down on his bunk and stared at the ceiling again. Tomorrow would bring the crucible, the final test that would determine who was worthy of becoming a real soldier in the Galactic Alliance military. He thought about all the restrictions and limitations that had been placed on humans during their training. He wondered if the alien cadets would still be laughing after they saw what humans could really do when it mattered most. Outside his window, the stars shined brightly in the cold darkness of space. Somewhere out there, real battles were being fought by real soldiers who had graduated from academies like this one. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow everything would change for all of them. The simulation chamber was bigger than any room Jake had ever seen before. The walls, floor, and ceiling looked like they were made of pure white light, but as soon as Admiral Kethfer pressed a button on his control panel, everything changed. The white light faded away and was replaced by the ruins of a city that looked like it had been destroyed by war. Broken buildings rose up around them like broken teeth. Smoke filled the air and made it hard to see very far in any direction. The ground was covered with pieces of concrete and twisted metal. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of weapons firing and explosions going off. The simulation was so real that Jake could smell the smoke and feel the heat from burning buildings. "Your mission is simple," Admiral Kethfer announced over the communication system that all cadets wore in their ears. "Enemy forces have taken control of this city. You must eliminate all hostile targets and secure the area for civilian evacuation. The simulation will adapt to your actions and become more difficult as time passes." The alien cadets immediately began moving toward the sounds of battle. Vexstar leaped from building to building like a purple shadow, his long arms helping him swing across gaps that would be impossible for other species to cross. His movements were so fast that he was almost invisible, appearing and disappearing between the ruins like a ghost. Throck ran straight down the main street, his massive feet making the ground shake with each step. Energy blasts from hidden enemies hit his thick skin but did not slow him down at all. He roared with excitement as he charged toward the first group of enemy soldiers. Ready to crush them with his bare hands, the Vorticon cadets moved in perfect formation, their crystal bodies reflecting light in all directions as they analyzed every possible route through the city. They calculated angles and distances with mathematical precision, never wasting a single movement or taking an unnecessary risk. Meanwhile, the human cadets moved very differently. Jake led his team through narrow alleys and side streets, avoiding the main roads where most of the fighting was happening. They crouched behind piles of rubble and moved carefully from one piece of cover to the next. To anyone watching, they looked scared and uncertain. "Look at them hiding like frightened animals," Vexstar transmitted over the communication system as he landed on a rooftop and watched the humans below. "They are too afraid to face the enemy directly." Lisa Brooks pressed herself against a broken wall and carefully looked around the corner before signaling to her teammates that it was safe to move forward. Her movements were slow and deliberate, completely different from the bold charges that the alien cadets were making. Ryan Cooper, Amy Stone, and Kevin Ross followed behind Jake and Lisa, staying low and moving quietly through the rubble. They stopped frequently to listen for sounds of danger and seemed to spend more time observing than fighting. The first hour of the crucible went exactly as everyone expected. The alien cadets cleared several enemy strongholds with impressive speed and efficiency. Vexstar's incredible agility allowed him to attack enemies from above and disappear before they could fight back. Throke's strength let him tear through enemy defenses like they were made of paper. The Vorticon cadets coordinated their attacks so perfectly that they eliminated entire groups of enemies without taking any damage at all. The humans, by comparison, had only engaged a small number of targets. They seemed to spend most of their time sneaking around and avoiding fights whenever possible. When they did encounter enemies, they took defensive positions and waited for the perfect moment to strike, rather than attacking aggressively like the other species. "This is embarrassing," Throck rumbled over the communication system as he threw an enemy soldier through a concrete wall. "The humans are making the rest of us look bad by being so weak and cowardly." But as the simulation continued, things began to change in ways that nobody expected. The enemy artificial intelligence that controlled the hostile forces was designed to learn from the actions of the cadets and create new challenges based on their behavior. It watched how each species fought and began to adapt its tactics accordingly. The aggressive charges that had worked so well for the alien cadets in the first hour became less effective as the enemy AI learned to predict their movements. Traps began appearing in the places where Vexstar liked to land after his jumps. The enemy started using stronger weapons that could actually hurt Throke's thick skin. The Vorticon formation tactics that had been so successful were countered by enemies who spread out and attacked from multiple directions at once. At the same time, new types of challenges began appearing in the simulation. Civilian rescue operations where innocent people were trapped in burning buildings. Hostage situations where the wrong decision could result in the death of non-combatants. Moral dilemmas where the fastest solution might cause massive collateral damage. These new challenges were much harder to handle than simple combat. They required careful thinking, patience, and the ability to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure. The alien cadets, who had been so confident and successful during the first hour, began to struggle with these more complex scenarios. Vexstar found himself trapped in a building where enemy soldiers were holding civilians hostage. His speed and agility were useless in the narrow hallways, and his usual tactic of attacking quickly and then escaping put innocent lives at risk. He hesitated for the first time since the simulation began, unsure of what to do. "I need backup," he transmitted, and there was uncertainty in his voice that had not been there before. Throck encountered a group of enemy soldiers who were using civilian shields to protect themselves. His incredible strength was meaningless if using it would harm innocent people. He stood in the middle of the street, his massive fists clenched in frustration, unable to attack without causing exactly the kind of casualties that would result. In mission failure, the Vorticon cadets found themselves facing a scenario that did not fit any of their calculated battle plans. Enemy forces had taken control of a hospital and were threatening to destroy it unless the cadets surrendered. The logical response was to minimize losses and complete the mission objectives. But this would mean abandoning hundreds of injured civilians to certain death. For the first time since the simulation began, The crystal beings stood motionless, their perfect cordon broken by a problem that had no clear, mathematical solution. While the alien cadets struggled with these new challenges, the human cadets continued their careful, methodical approach to the mission. Jake coordinated a civilian evacuation from a collapsed apartment building while enemy snipers fired at them from nearby rooftops. His voice remained calm and steady over the communication system as he directed his team's movements. Lisa found herself in the same hospital that had paralyzed the Vorticon cadets. Instead of trying to calculate the perfect solution, she simply began talking to the enemy soldiers. Her voice was quiet and reasonable as she negotiated for the release of the civilians, offering trades and compromises that gradually reduced the threat without violence. Ryan, Amy, and Kevin worked together to disarm a series of bombs that the enemy had planted throughout the city. The explosives were designed to cause maximum civilian casualties, and defusing them required steady hands and clear thinking under enormous pressure. While alien cadets in similar situations were making mistakes due to stress and fear, the humans worked with calm precision. Admiral Kethver watched from the control room as stress indicators for the non-human cadets began climbing toward dangerous levels. Several Braxtons had already been eliminated from the simulation after entering berserker rages that made them attack everything around them, including their own teammates. A group of Vorticon cadets had simply shut down when faced with a problem that their logical minds could not solve, but the human stress indicators remained steady and controlled, even as they faced the same impossible situations that were breaking their alien counterparts. How are they staying so calm? Vexstar demanded over the communication system. His purple skin had turned pale with exhaustion and fear. The pressure should be overwhelming them by now. What the alien cadets did not understand was that the humans were experiencing exactly the same psychological pressure as everyone else. The difference was that they had been trained from birth to hide their true reactions and continue functioning even when their minds were screaming in terror. The neural dampeners and mood stabilizers were not making the humans immune to stress. They were simply preventing that stress from showing on the outside, allowing the humans to make rational decisions even when their emotions were in chaos. As the second hour of the crucible ended, the gap between human and alien performance was becoming obvious to everyone watching. The species that had seemed weakest and most restricted were now outperforming their supposedly superior counterparts in every meaningful way that mattered for real military operations. The third hour of the crucible brought challenges that none of the cadets had ever experienced before. The enemy artificial intelligence had been watching and learning from every move they made during the first 2 hours. Now it was using that knowledge against them in ways that seemed almost personal and cruel. Vexstar discovered this the hard way when he tried to use his favorite jumping technique to reach a high rooftop. The moment his feet left the ground, a hidden energy net activated and caught him in mid-air. He hung there like a trapped insect, struggling against the glowing threads while enemy soldiers surrounded the building below. His incredible speed and agility had become a weakness that the enemy could predict and exploit. "This is impossible," he transmitted over the communication system, his voice high with panic. "How did they know I would jump there?" The answer was simple but terrifying. The enemy AI had analyzed thousands of hours of Zephyrian combat footage and identified the most common movement patterns of his species. It knew exactly where creatures like Vexstar preferred to land, and it had prepared traps in all of those locations. Throck was having similar problems on the other side of the city. The enemy had started using his own massive strength against him by rigging buildings to collapse when he tried to smash through them. Every time he punched a wall or threw an enemy soldier, the structure around him became more unstable. His raw power, which had seemed so impressive during the early stages of the simulation, was now causing more problems than it solved. The Braxton warrior found himself standing in the middle of a school playground, surrounded by the sounds of children crying in terror. Enemy soldiers had taken position inside the school building, using the young civilians as human shields. Throke's usual tactic of charging straight at his enemies would result in the deaths of dozens of Innocent children, his massive hands trembled with frustration as he realized that all of his strength was useless in this situation. He could not smash his way to victory without becoming a monster who killed the very people he was supposed to protect. "I do not know what to do," he admitted over the communication system, and the defeat in his voice was painful to hear. The Vorticon cadets were facing their own nightmare scenario. Their perfect logical minds had been analyzing every possible solution to the challenges in front of them, but the enemy AI had started presenting them with problems that had no correct answers. In one building, they found a group of wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical evacuation. In another building across the street, a family of civilians was trapped under debris and would die without rescue. The Vorticons could save one group or the other, but not both. Their crystalline bodies flickered with confused patterns of light as they tried to calculate a solution that did not exist. "All available data has been processed," one of them announced in a voice that sounded like breaking glass. "No acceptable outcome can be achieved with current resources." The other Vortons stood frozen in place, their advanced minds locked in an endless loop of impossible calculations. They could not move forward because logic demanded a perfect solution, but no perfect solution was available. Meanwhile, pressure indicators throughout the simulation chamber were climbing to dangerous levels. Several alien cadets had already suffered complete mental breakdowns and been removed from the exercise by medical teams. Others were making increasingly desperate and reckless decisions as their stress levels overwhelmed their ability to think clearly. But in the midst of all this chaos and failure, the human cadets continued to operate with the same calm efficiency they had shown from the beginning. They moved through the ruined city like they had been born to navigate disasters, finding solutions to problems that were paralyzing their alien counterparts. Jake Martinez had reached the school where Throck was trapped by his own moral dilemma. Instead of trying to fight his way through the enemy soldiers, Jake simply walked up to the front entrance with his hands visible and empty. He began talking to the enemy commander in a calm, reasonable voice. "You have children in there," Jake said. "Some of them are probably scared and crying. This does not have to end with anyone getting hurt." The enemy soldiers were confused by this approach. They had prepared for a violent assault, not a negotiation. Jake used their uncertainty to his advantage, gradually convincing them that they had more to gain by releasing the children than by continuing to hold them hostage. Lisa Brooks had found the Vorticon cadets, paralyzed by their impossible choice between saving soldiers or civilians. She looked at the situation for exactly 3 seconds before making her decision. "Ryan, Amy, take the civilians," she ordered. "Kevin and I will get the soldiers. We move in 60 seconds. The Vorticons watched in amazement as Lisa split her team and attacked both problems simultaneously. It was not a perfect solution by their mathematical standards, but it was a practical one that would save the maximum number of lives possible under the circumstances. "But the tactical analysis indicates insufficient personnel for dual operations," one of the crystal beings protested. "Sometimes you have to work with what you have instead of what you wish you had," Lisa replied as she ran toward the building, full of wounded soldiers. Her words were simple, but they contained a wisdom that the logical Vorticon minds could not process. Humans did not always seek perfect solutions because they understood that perfect solutions were rarely available in real combat situations. Admiral Kethfer observed all of this from the control room, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated deep thought. Beside him, Colonel Patricia Hughes watched the stress monitors with professional interest. 60% of non-human participants are approaching critical psychological thresholds, a technician reported. "Recommend immediate intervention to prevent permanent mental trauma." Colonel Hughes shook her head. "Let it continue," she said quietly. "They need to see this." On the screens around them, they could watch the alien cadets struggling with challenges that the humans were handling with apparent ease. But Hughes knew that the humans were not finding these situations easy at all. They were simply better at hiding their emotional responses and continuing to function despite overwhelming stress. The neural dampeners that the humans wore were not eliminating their fear and anxiety. Instead, they were preventing those emotions from interfering with rational decision-making. The mood stabilizers were not making the humans feel calm and happy. They were just stopping panic reactions from paralyzing critical thinking processes. In essence, the humans were experiencing the same psychological torture as everyone else in the simulation. They had simply been trained to endure it without breaking down. Vexstar had managed to escape from the energy net that had trapped him, but his confidence was completely shattered. Every movement he made felt predictable and dangerous. The enemy seemed to know what he was going to do before he did it himself. His species' greatest advantage had become a liability that put him in constant danger. He watched from a safe hiding place as Jake Martinez coordinated the rescue of the school children. The human moved with purpose and certainty, never hesitating or second-guessing his decisions. There was something terrifying about that level of controlled determination. Throck had been rescued from his moral paralysis by Lisa's team, but the experience had left him badly shaken. He was used to solving problems with brute force, but this simulation kept presenting him with situations where strength was not only useless but actually harmful. How do they make it look so easy? He asked over the communication system, watching as Amy Stone diffused another explosive device with steady hands. The Vorticon cadets had broken free from their logical loops, thanks to Lisa's example, but they were deeply disturbed by what they had witnessed. Their entire understanding of tactical decision-making was based on mathematical analysis and optimal outcomes. The humans seemed to operate on completely different principles that made no logical sense, but somehow produced better results. As the third hour of the crucible drew to a close, it had become obvious to everyone in the simulation that something fundamental had changed. The alien cadets who had started the exercise with such confidence and superiority were now struggling just to survive the increasingly complex challenges, but the humans continued to function at the same steady level. They had maintained from the very beginning. They rescued civilians, disarmed explosives, negotiated with enemy forces, and solved impossible problems without ever showing signs of stress or uncertainty. The species that everyone had considered weakest and most restricted were now clearly outperforming their supposedly superior counterparts in every category that mattered for real military operations, and they were doing it while carrying the same psychological burden that was breaking the minds of some of the galaxy's most advanced warriors. Admiral Kethver stood in the control room overlooking the simulation chamber, his crystalline form shifting through patterns of deep blue and silver that indicated serious contemplation. Around him, monitoring stations displayed stress levels, performance metrics, and psychological profiles of every cadet participating in the crucible. The data told a story that most of the observers found difficult to believe. The alien cadets, despite their obvious physical and mental advantages, were failing at an alarming rate. Meanwhile, the humans continued to perform their duties with the same methodical efficiency they had shown from the beginning. But Admiral Kethver knew that the real test was about to begin. He activated the general communication system that connected him to every cadet in the simulation. His voice echoed through the ruined city where dozens of young beings were struggling to complete their mission. "Attention all participants," the Admiral announced. "We are now entering the final phase of the crucible. All training restrictions are hereby temporarily lifted." The words sent a shockwave through the simulation chamber. Most of the alien cadets did not understand what this meant, but they sensed that something important was about to happen. They had heard rumors about human restrictions, but none of them had ever seen what humans were like when those limitations were removed. In the human quarters of the simulation, 5 small devices began powering down with soft electronic chirps. The neural dampeners that Jake Martinez and his teammates had worn for 3 years slowly deactivated, their metal bands becoming cold and lifeless around their foreheads. The mood stabilizers that had been injected into their bloodstreams every morning began to lose their chemical effectiveness. For the first time since arriving at the Galactic Military Academy, the humans were operating without any artificial limitations on their natural abilities. The change was not immediate, but it was unmistakable. Jake felt it first as a strange lightness in his head, like a fog that he had not realized was there, suddenly clearing away. His awareness of his surroundings began to expand in ways that seemed almost supernatural. He could hear sounds that had been filtered out before, smell scents that had been dampened, and see details that had been blurred by the neural dampeners. But more than that, his mind began processing information at a speed and complexity that felt completely natural, even though it had been suppressed for years. Tactical possibilities that would have taken him minutes to calculate before now appeared in his consciousness instantly. He could see the entire battlefield in his mind like a three-dimensional map, with every enemy position, every civilian location, and every possible route marked clearly. Lisa Brooks felt the mood stabilizers leaving her system, like chains falling away from her emotions. The artificial calm that had defined her personality for 3 years dissolved, replaced by an intensity of focus that was almost frightening. Her ability to read people and situations became razor-sharp, allowing her to predict enemy movements and civilian reactions with startling accuracy. Ryan Cooper, Amy Stone, and Kevin Ross experienced similar transformations as their natural human capabilities were restored. But perhaps the most dramatic change was not in their individual abilities, but in how they began to function as a team. Without the restrictions that had been dampening their natural instincts, the 5 humans started operating as a single organism. They anticipated each other's movements, covered each other's weaknesses, and maximized each other's strengths in ways that seemed almost telepathic to outside observers. Jake coordinated the group's movements with silent hand signals and subtle shifts in body language that his teammates understood perfectly. Lisa began providing tactical analysis and enemy behavior predictions before anyone asked for them. Ryan, Amy, and Kevin moved through the battlefield with fluid precision, each one knowing exactly where the others would be at any given moment. The alien cadets noticed the change immediately, even though they did not understand what was causing it. Vexstar was hiding behind a damaged vehicle when he saw Jake Martinez moving through a nearby street. The human's careful, measured steps had been replaced by something that looked more like controlled hunting. His movements were fluid and predatory, with an underlying sense of danger that made Vexstar's skin crawl. "Something is different about them," Vexstar transmitted over the communication system, his voice tight with concern. OK was watching from a different location as Lisa Brooks approached a group of enemy soldiers who had taken hostages. Instead of the quiet, hesitant negotiations she had been using before, Lisa began speaking with an intensity and authority that made the enemy fighters step back in alarm. Her voice carried undertones of threat that were subtle but unmistakable. "You will release the civilians now," she told them, and there was something in her tone that suggested terrible consequences for disobedience. The enemy soldiers, who were artificial intelligence constructs designed to resist negotiation and fight to the death, found themselves unexpectedly intimidated by this small human female. They began to comply with her demands without fully understanding why. The Vorticon cadets observed this interaction with growing confusion. According to their analysis, Lisa's negotiation tactics should not have been effective against the enemy. AI programming? The logical response for the artificial soldiers would have been to ignore her threats and continue with their mission. Instead, they were surrendering without a fight. Human psychological warfare capabilities exceed theoretical parameters, one of the crystal beings reported to his teammates. Current behavior patterns do not match previous observational data. What the Vorticons did not understand was that Lisa was no longer just negotiating. She was using her unrestricted human ability to read and manipulate social situations in ways that even advanced artificial intelligence found difficult to resist. Her words, tone, and body language were working together to create a psychological pressure that transcended normal communication. Meanwhile, Ryan Cooper had reached the area where several Braxton cadets were trapped by a series of interconnected explosive devices. The aliens had been trying to disarm the bombs for over an hour without success, their massive hands too clumsy for the delicate work required. Ryan approached the first device and studied it for exactly 7 seconds before beginning to work. His hands moved with surgical precision, finding and neutralizing trigger mechanisms that the Braxtons had not even noticed. Within minutes, he had disarmed explosives that had seemed impossible to defuse. How did he do that so quickly? One of the Braxtons asked in amazement. Amy Stone and Kevin Ross were working together to clear an enemy stronghold that had been giving the alien cadets problems for the entire simulation. They moved through the building like shadows, appearing and disappearing in ways that confused both enemies and observers. Their coordination was so perfect that they seemed to share a single mind. Enemy soldiers who had been programmed to fight with ruthless efficiency found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The two humans anticipated their movements, countered their tactics, and eliminated them with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. Admiral Kethver watched all of this from the control room with expressions that ranged from satisfaction to concern. The transformation of the human cadets was exactly what he had expected, but seeing it happen was still deeply unsettling. "Monitor their stress levels closely," he ordered his technicians. "Make sure they do not push beyond safe parameters." But the readings showed something that surprised everyone in the control room. Despite their dramatically increased performance and intensity, the human stress indicators remained stable. They were operating at levels that should have been psychologically impossible, yet they showed no signs of mental strain or emotional breakdown. Colonel Patricia Hughes stood beside the Admiral, watching her fellow humans demonstrate capabilities that most of the galaxy had never seen before. She remembered her own training years ago, when she had first experienced the removal of restrictions during a real combat situation. The memory was both exhilarating and terrifying. "They are magnificent," Admiral Kethver said quietly, his crystalline form pulsing with colors of respect and fear. "They are also dangerous," Colonel Hughes replied. "This is why we keep them restricted during normal operations." As the final phase of the Crucible continued, the gap between human and alien performance became an unbridgeable chasm. The 5 unrestricted humans began systematically eliminating every remaining enemy position in the simulation with ruthless efficiency. What had taken the combined alien forces 3 hours to partially accomplish, the humans completed in 23 minutes. Vex single quotes Tar Throck, and the surviving Vorticon cadets could only watch in stunned silence as their human classmates demonstrated why their species had been accepted into the Galactic Alliance despite appearing to be the weakest members. The simulation chamber slowly faded back to its original white walls as the Crucible came to an end. The ruined city, the smoke, and the sounds of battle disappeared like a bad dream, leaving only the sterile brightness of the training facility. But the silence that filled the room was heavy with shock and confusion. The alien cadets stood in small groups, their faces showing expressions of disbelief and fear. They had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about humans and their place in the galactic community. The beings they had mocked as weak and restricted had just demonstrated capabilities that seemed almost supernatural. Jake Martinez and his team stood quietly near the center of the chamber, their neural dampeners and mood stabilizers automatically reactivating as soon as the simulation ended. The intense focus and predatory grace they had shown during the final phase was already fading, replaced by the calm, controlled demeanor that everyone was used to seeing from human cadets. Admiral Kethver entered the chamber followed by Colonel Patricia Hughes and several other Academy instructors. The Admiral's crystalline form was pulsing with colors that indicated he was preparing to deliver important information. The alien cadets gathered around him, still trying to process what they had just experienced. "You have all witnessed something today that few beings in the galaxy have ever seen," Admiral Kethver began, his voice carrying the weight of serious revelation. "But before we discuss what happened, I want you to understand why it happened." He activated a holographic display that showed comparative data from hundreds of different species across the Galactic Alliance. Charts and graphs filled the air above them, displaying physical capabilities, mental processing speeds, and combat effectiveness ratings for dozens of different alien races. "Every species in our alliance has evolved unique survival traits over millions of years," the Admiral continued. The Braxtons developed incredible physical strength to survive on high-gravity worlds, where even the smallest creatures could crush ordinary beings. The Zephyrians evolved enhanced speed and agility to escape predators on planets where death could come from any direction. The Vorticons achieved perfect logical processing to navigate complex social structures, where a single mistake could destroy entire civilizations. The holographic display shifted to show human data, and the numbers seemed disappointingly average compared to the other species. Humans were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest by conventional measurements. But there were other categories highlighted in red that most of the alien cadets had never paid attention to before. Colonel Hughes stepped forward and pointed to those red categories. Humans evolved something different, she said in a quiet voice that somehow commanded absolute attention. They developed the ability to function under extreme psychological pressure while maintaining perfect cooperation with their teammates. They learned to suppress their own survival instincts when necessary to protect others. Most importantly, they gained the capacity to make optimal decisions even when facing certain death. Vextar's purple skin had gone pale as he stared at the human data. "But they seemed so normal during training," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "So weak and restricted." "That is perhaps their most dangerous trait," Admiral Kethfer replied. "Humans have learned to hide their true nature so completely that even they sometimes forget what they are capable of when the restrictions are removed." The holographic display changed again, this time showing stress response charts from the Crucible simulation. Every alien species showed dramatic spikes during high-pressure scenarios, with many readings climbing to dangerous levels that indicated potential psychological breakdown. But the human stress indicators remained steady throughout the entire exercise, even during the final phase when their restrictions had been lifted. "This is impossible," one of the Vorticon cadets said, his crystal body flickering with confused patterns of light. "No biological entity can maintain such stable psychological responses under extreme duress." "That is where you are wrong," Colonel Hughes replied. "Humans can do exactly that, but it comes at a cost. The neural dampeners and mood stabilizers you have seen us use are not there to make us stronger or more capable. They are there to make us safe to be around." She gestured toward Jake and his teammates, who were standing at attention with their usual calm expressions. When humans operate without restrictions in high-stress environments, they become something that most species find psychologically disturbing to witness. Their emotional responses shut down almost completely, allowing them to make decisions based purely on logic and tactical necessity. Throck shifted uncomfortably, his massive frame suddenly seeming smaller than before. "You mean they become like machines?" "No," Jake Martinez said, speaking for the first time since the simulation ended. "We become what we were designed by evolution to become." Humans survived on a planet where everything was trying to kill them, where cooperation meant the difference between life and death, and where emotional responses could get your entire tribe destroyed. His voice was calm and steady, but there was something underneath it that made the alien cadets take an unconscious step backward. "We learned to turn off our fear when it would interfere with survival. We learned to work together so perfectly that we could function as a single organism when necessary. We learned to continue fighting even when we knew we were going to die, because sometimes sacrifice was the only way to protect the people we cared about." Lisa Brooks nodded and added, "The restrictions we accept during training are not punishment or limitation. They are a gift we give to our allies. They allow you to see us as individuals with personalities and emotions, rather than as the tactical weapons we become when survival is on the line." The alien cadets were beginning to understand the true implications of what they had witnessed. The humans had not been hiding weakness behind their restrictions. They had been hiding strength that was so alien and terrifying that it could damage the psychological well-being of other species. Admiral Kethfer activated another display that showed footage from actual combat situations, where human soldiers had operated without restrictions. The alien cadets watched in fascinated horror as human troops moved through battlefields with the same fluid coordination they had witnessed during the Crucible. But in these real situations, the stakes were not simulated and the consequences were permanent. In actual warfare against enemies of the Galactic Alliance, human soldiers become something that our opponents fear above all else, the Admiral explained. They are calm, coordinated, and utterly relentless. They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation if it serves the greater tactical objective. They can function effectively even when their entire unit has been destroyed around them. The display showed human soldiers continuing to fight even when badly wounded, coordinating complex operations while under intense enemy fire and making split-second decisions that saved thousands of lives at the cost of their own. It was both inspiring and deeply disturbing to watch. Ryan Cooper spoke up from his position with the other human cadets. We do not enjoy being what we become when the restrictions are off, he said simply. It is necessary sometimes, but it changes us in ways that are difficult to reverse. The neural dampeners and mood stabilizers help us remember how to be human again after combat operations. Amy Stone and Kevin Ross nodded in agreement. They had all experienced the psychological aftermath of unrestricted operation during previous training exercises, and they knew how difficult it could be to reconnect with normal emotions and social interactions afterward. This is why human soldiers often struggle with what you call post-traumatic stress, Colonel Hughes explained. It is not just the memory of violence that affects them. It is the memory of becoming something inhuman, even if that transformation was necessary for survival. The alien cadets were beginning to see the humans in a completely different light. The beings they had thought were weak and overly restricted were actually the most dangerous warriors in the Galactic Alliance, voluntarily limiting themselves. Out of consideration for others, Vextar approached Jake Martinez hesitantly, his purple skin still pale with shock. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. We all do. We thought you were inferior because of your restrictions. Jake smiled, and the expression seemed more complex than it had before the crucible. No apology is necessary, he replied. We are used to being underestimated. In fact, it can be a tactical advantage when enemies make the same mistake you did. Throck looked at the human cadets with new respect and a hint of fear. How do you live with knowing what you are capable of? He asked. The same way you live. With your strength, Lisa answered. We choose when to use it and when to hold back. The difference is that our capabilities are psychological rather than physical, which makes them harder for other species to understand or accept. Admiral Kethver's crystalline form pulsed with colors of finality as he prepared to conclude the lesson. You have learned today why humans are restricted during training and why those restrictions are lifted only in the most desperate circumstances. They are not the weakest members of our alliance. They are potentially the most dangerous, and they have chosen to limit themselves for the benefit of all.